You will not survive this winter. Not because the cold is extraordinary, not because a storm arrives without warning and buries every road under something impassable, not because of plague or wolves or raiders coming down from the hills before the first hard frost. You will not survive this winter because of a number you calculated wrong in September, a number so small you barely registered it when you marked it on the beam above the grain shelf. Perhaps 2 bushels short, perhaps 3. You will not know which until February, when the shelf begins showing bare wood beneath the remaining sacks and the snow outside is still 4 inches thick, and the nearest market is 4 miles across ground that has not been fully passable since December. By then, the decision has already been made, not by you, by the season itself. A winter in the medieval world does not kill through spectacle. It kills through arithmetic. The fire is burning lower than it should. The bread is thinner than it was. The body beside yours in the sleeping space has been coughing for 3 weeks. Outside, the light lasts perhaps 7 hours, and in those 7 hours, every task that keeps the household alive must be completed, and your arms are tired, and your stomach is not full, and the woodpile has reached the stage where you are counting not logs but days. This is not a story about a catastrophic winter. It is the story of every winter, the ordinary, expected, documented medieval winter that erased households across northern Europe with the quiet efficiency of a system that did not require the survival of any individual peasant household to keep functioning. You could die, and the system would continue. The village would replant in spring. Someone else would work the strips your family had plowed for 2 generations. The hearth fire would belong to someone else by autumn. The agricultural year ends in silence, not metaphorical silence. Actual silence settling across the harvested fields when the last grain has been cut and threshed, and the stubble stands pale and frozen in the morning light. The fields produced what they produced. Whatever amount fills the granary now is the amount you have. There is no revision. The number is fixed. You have been carrying it in your head since the day you finished threshing, running it against the months ahead, dividing it by the mouths in the household, weighing it against the winter 2 years past, when the Hartley household ran out of barley in January, and the man came to your father's door with his cap in his hands. You remember what that looked like. You have been thinking about that face since September. The small holding you occupy is roughly 15 to 20 acres of open field strips. You hold it by villanage, not yours in any legal sense, held by custom and inherited obligation and the labor services you owe, the Lord's domain, and the rents paid in grain and coin that mark each year of your household's continued existence within the village structure. The harvest this year was not catastrophic. A catastrophic harvest is visible to everyone immediately. Aid might arrive. The Lord might suspend certain rents. The church might open emergency grain stores. Catastrophe has protocols. What you have is subtler, a slightly reduced harvest, perhaps 10% below a normal year, enough that each measure placed in storage represented a small fraction less than the year before, enough that the rye sacks sit at a height you have been staring at since October, not quite as high as you need, not quite low enough to justify immediate alarm. Enough that when your wife asked how things stood, you said manageable, and you meant it, and you are probably right, and that word has been sitting in your chest like a stone of uncertain weight ever since. Outside, the sky's the color of pewter, the last week of October, or near enough. Daylight is leaving earlier each evening, the sun dropping behind the western tree line before the afternoon tasks are finished. You have been stacking wood against the south wall of the house for the past hour, working in near darkness. The stack is shoulder height at its tallest point, 8 feet wide. You have been mentally dividing it against the winter months since September. The number is not comfortable. The fire inside is burning steadily. You can smell it through the wall. The thick sweetness of oak smoke mixed with something heavier from the damp pieces you added this morning. The house is low-ceilinged, roughly 20 feet at its longest interior dimension, walls of timber framing packed with wattle and daub, a thatch roof 2 years old and beginning to show its age in the northwestern corner. It holds smoke more than it holds heat. This is the permanent compromise of medieval housing for people at your level. No stone construction, no glazed windows. Choose shuttered openings that keep cold out only by also keeping light out. You choose smoke over darkness most days. 3 children inside. The oldest is 10, nearly old enough for full labor contribution. The middle child is 7. The youngest is 4 and has never seen a winter like the one 2 years past, when temperatures dropped for 3 consecutive weeks and the pond in the lower field froze to walking depth. You were 22 that winter. Your father was still alive. The memory is precise and physical. The earthen floor through your boots when the fire was too low, the condensation dripping from the thatch in the mornings, the tight quality of hunger that lives just below the rib cage and does not fully resolve even after you eat. You did not starve. The calculation was close enough that you still think about it. If the grain measurement in the first week of November produces a number. You do this carefully, using the wooden measure your grandfather made, its surface worn smooth by 40 years of hands. Every sack on the shelf, rye, then wheat, then barley. You carry the numbers in your head for a day before speaking them. The rye will last until March at current rations. If the winter runs long, and this is always the variable, the thing that cannot be planned around, February becomes a threshold you cannot see past. The barley is the sharper problem. Less than you thought. You trace it back through the autumn, the section of field that drained poorly after the heavy August rains. Growth running thin there. You remember walking those strips and thinking it would probably recover. It did not recover. You tell your wife the number. She is quiet for a moment. She asks about the seed grain. Have you separated it clearly? Is the boundary secure? You tell her yes. The seed grain is in the smallest sack at the back of the shelf, tied with a piece of red cord that she put there herself last spring after planting. The cord is not a lock. It is both of you agreeing in advance. Regardless of what happens to the rest of the shelf, that sack stays closed. She adjusts the portion she was planning to put in the pot tonight. The fire crackles. The children sleep. Outside, the first real cold presses against the north wall like a hand against a door. November moves in a rhythm that demands full physical attention every day. 8 hours of usable light at the month's beginning, declining towards 7 by its end. In those hours, animals watered. Hay moved from the storage rick to the shelter walls patched where gaps have widened in the first freeze cycles, ice broken from the stream edges, the path to the animal shelter strewn with straw against the slick ground. Falling in winter is a different category of problem than falling in summer. A broken arm in July heals over 6 weeks while you continue reduced work. A broken arm in February means 6 weeks of reduced capacity at the moment when every task is survival critical, when the fire must be maintained and the animals tended regardless of who is available to tend them. You cross the icy path carefully every morning. The oxen are the central calculation. 2 working animals, the mechanical foundation of spring agriculture. And without them, without at least one in functional condition, spring plowing requires either renting from a neighbor, which incurs obligation, or working by hand with the spade, which is possible and significantly slower and will reduce planting acreage. They eat a significant portion of stored hay every day. The pig slaughtered this week. Its salted meat goes into the barrel. One of the 4 sheep, the oldest, whose wool production has declined over 3 seasons, slaughtered at the end of the first week. Its meat supplements the barrel. Its hide goes into the cold to be worked into leather or traded when the market reopens in spring. After the slaughter, 3 sheep eating hay. The numbers are better. The work does not stop. Your hands are raw from cold. So when the day ends before you have finished the second task you plan to complete before dark. Wood consumption accelerates in cold weather faster than any warm weather planning accounts for. You have been feeding the hearth with split oak and elm for 3 weeks. Larger logs burn long and hot. reserved for evenings when cooking happens. Smaller branches serve during the day at lower intensity. At night, the fire is banked, coals pushed together, covered with ash. And by morning, the interior temperature has dropped to something technically above freezing only because of the residual heat in the stone surround and the body warmth of 5 people sleeping in the same room. Morning is the coldest moment of the day. You know this in your muscles before you are fully awake. So you rebuild the fire from banked coals in a routine that takes 10 minutes on a good morning and 20 when the coals have gone further down than expected, when the first pieces of wood are damp. Damp wood is a constant winter inefficiency. The stack outside absorbs moisture during rain and thaw periods. Damp wood produces more smoke and less heat. You burn more of it to achieve the same thermal result. By January, you will be working with wood significantly wetter than what you started with. The village has access to the Lord's woodland through common rights, fallen wood only, not standing timber. In November, these areas still yield useful material. You make 2 trips with the hand cart before the snow comes, adding perhaps 3 additional days of fuel to the stack. The cart is heavy, your shoulders and lower back ache. And you feel the arithmetic as you unload. 3 days of warmth purchased with 2 full days of labor. This is the exchange rate. Labor buys time. Time is measured in remaining fuel. The snow comes in the 2nd week of November. Not heavy, a thin covering that hardens overnight into a crust. Ice forms in the animal troughs each night. The path between house and shelter requires daily maintenance. Everything outdoor task takes longer. Every outdoor task already took too long. December. Daylight contracts to between 7 and 8 hours. The grain reserve is holding to schedule. Your wife's daily portion measurement has been accurate, and the household has adjusted to smaller portions without significant complaint. The oldest child understands, and he has seen enough winters to know that bread is thinner in January than September, and this is not an error, but a fact of the calendar. Porridge is the primary meal. Rye porridge in the morning, cooked in water with a small piece of salted pork when the allocation allows. Bread and preserves at midday. The evening meal the largest, cooked in the pot over the hearth. You eat enough to function, you do not eat enough to feel fully satisfied. The indoor work fills the shortened days. Plow irons checked for cracking, harness leather cleaned and worked with fat. The cart wheel with the loose spoke attended to by firelight, the wooden mallet familiar in your hands. Your wife spins wool throughout the day. Distaff in her hands whenever she's not cooking or managing the children, the rhythmic pull of fiber into thread that will eventually become cloth. The day has structure. The structure creates the illusion of normalcy. Christmas arrives as a genuine structural interruption. The 12 days from the Nativity through Epiphany represent the one extended period when labor obligations to the Lord's domain are suspended. You go to the stone church for the Christmas Mass. Cold in the way stone buildings are cold in winter, the chill radiating from walls and floor, but 60 people sharing the space and the combined body heat making it marginally warmer than the exterior. The priest delivers the service in Latin. You do not understand it in any specific sense, but you know when to speak the responses. Afterward, a gathering at the most prosperous free tenant's house. Ale from his stores, a bread that is not yet thin, bread. A piece of roasted meat. You observe the food carefully, as data. He is fine, his stores are deeper than yours. He will be fine. You drink your ale and note this and say nothing. The gathering restores some of the information network that isolation has been severing. You learn that one household in the Eastern Quarter has already begun borrowing grain. You learn the road to market is technically passable. You learn the miller's cough has improved. You drink another half cup of ale and calculate what you have learned against your current reserve numbers. Manageable. Still manageable. January arrives without announcement, marking itself only through continued light shortening and the cold that has been building since the autumn equinox. The serious cold snap arrives in the month's middle. You wake on a Tuesday morning to a darkness that feels different from ordinary morning darkness. The cold has it, the walls have it, the floor has it, the straw in the sleeping area is stiff at its edges where body heat has not reached. You can see your breath before you have taken 3 steps toward the hearth. The banked coals are lower than they should be. Not out, a faint orange glow when you scrape ash aside, but lower, the external temperature now cold enough to pull heat from well-banked coals faster than the ash insulation can counteract. 20 minutes to rebuild the fire to real heat. 20 minutes of watching your own breath in a room that will not reach comfortable temperature for another 2 hours. Outside, the cold pulls tears from your eyes immediately. The kind of cold that forms ice in standing water within an hour. The kind that requires cloth wrapped around your hands for even short outdoor tasks. The kind that, if your clothing were wet rather than merely damp, would become dangerous within an hour of exposure. Your clothing is not wet. It is never fully dry. Wool absorbs moisture from the air and your body across each day, and the overnight period beside the fire never quite returns it to the dry state it held when it came off the loom. This is the permanent condition of winter clothing for everyone at your level. You wear it and your body warms it from the inside, and eventually the difference between damp and dry becomes irrelevant. The oldest child meets you at the door after the morning animal work. He has added a piece of wood to the fire in the correct position without being asked. You look at him and nod. The look carries everything. Cold is serious today. Fire is the center. Everything else arranges around the fire. He is 10 years old. He understands completely. The wood pile has been declining for 6 weeks. You no longer measure it by stacking height. You measure it by the kind of wood available. November held large split pieces, dense oak heartwood, slow-burning sustained heat. December moved through secondary pieces, smaller sections, faster burn but acceptable. The second week of January reaches the miscellaneous layer. Smaller branches, offcuts from the autumn woodland gathering, pieces with bend and twist that resist splitting cleanly. Everything burns, but the efficiency drops. More frequent fire additions, more smoke relative to heat. Occasional wet pieces that fill the interior with a thick, irritating haze that makes eyes water and coughs worsen. The secondary woodland gathering you did in November added 3 days. At current consumption, the main stack has 6 to 7 weeks remaining. The cold snap has pushed that toward the lower end. 6 weeks from mid-January ends at the beginning of March. Inside the survival window, but with no margin. And the weather, read in sky, wind, cloud formation, animal behavior, the accumulated environmental literacy of someone who depends on weather, suggests the cold will ease, but not soon. You and your neighbor make another forest trip. 2 days. You return with wood that adds perhaps 4 days to the stack. Your lower back, which has been intermittent since a poor lifting decision 3 years ago, tightens on the second morning and you work with it for the rest of the day. It costs you focus and slows your movement. 4 days, purchased with 2 days and a back that is now a variable. The second child gets sick in the 3rd week of January. The cough that has been moving through the village arrives through the 7-year-old, who starts coughing on a Thursday, and by Saturday has developed the rattling chest sound that marks more than ordinary congestion. Fever. Almost no eating for 3 days. He lies in the sleeping area close to the hearth, coughing and sleeping in intervals, asking frequently for water. Fever requires warmth. The fire cannot drop in the way it has been dropping overnight in the interest of fuel conservation. The fire burns higher than it should for nearly 2 weeks. 4 or 5 extra pieces of wood per day are pulled forward from a reserve that is already marginal. Your wife tends him constantly. The oldest child takes on her usual outdoor tasks alongside his own. You manage everything else. He recovers. 12 days from first cough to the morning he asks for porridge with something approaching normal appetite. During those 12 days, you burned extra wood and used extra food, and your wife operated at reduced sleep, and the net cost to the household reserve is measurable. You are aware of how contingent this assessment is. If the illness had spread to the oxen, who share the adjacent shelter, the calculus would have been different. If the fever had deepened rather than broken after a week, the outcome would be uncertain. If you had already been at the true edge of your fuel reserve when the illness arrived, and the decision to burn higher for his warmth would have been impossible rather than merely difficult. You are not at the true edge. You are close to it. February is the month the medieval winter system calls the deep margin. Everything is at the edge of everything. Food, fuel, health, the physical condition of the house itself. The thatch in the northwestern corner has developed a slow leak, producing a steady drip during a 3-day rain in the second week. It cannot be repaired until March allows roof work. A piece of cloth stretched under it catches the water and must be wrung out twice daily. The damp accumulates in the sleeping area corner and creates additional cold in a space where cold is already a daily fact. You measure the grain again in the month's first days. Carry the numbers for a day before speaking them, and the rye will last until the end of March at current rations. But current rations have already been reduced once, in late November, and they were lean to begin with. A second reduction is possible. People do not starve immediately from eating less than optimal, but below a certain caloric level, consequences multiply. Physical weakness, reduced work capacity, lower body temperature, increasing susceptibility to cold, weakened immune function, increasing susceptibility to illness. These consequences are not theoretical. You can feel the edge of them in your hands when you work in the mornings, in the way your feet stay cold longer before circulation warms them. You reduce the portions anyway, each bowl slightly smaller. Bread baked in thinner loaves. Broth stretched an extra day before the bones are discarded. Ahmad, your wife, implements these changes without announcement. They simply happen. The middle child, still recovering from his illness, is hungry in a way that shows in his face and posture before he has learned to conceal it the way adults must. You look at his face and look away and eat your reduced portion in silence. The seed grain with the red cord is still at the back of the shelf, still tied. You have looked at it every day for 4 months. The man 3 holdings down asks the bailiff for a loan in the second week of February. You know this because the village knows it. The visible sign is the conversation outside the church on a Sunday morning after Mass, observed by several people, and the content readable by anyone with enough experience in village social dynamics to understand what a man talking to the bailiff with his cap in his hands on a February morning probably means. He borrowed grain. The terms are not announced publicly, but their general structure is understood by everyone. He receives the grain now at the depth of winter need. He repays after harvest at a rate that includes principal plus a premium functioning as interest, plus potentially additional labor obligation to the Lord's domain during a specified period. The exact terms depend on the negotiations, the bailiff's assessment of his situation, the Lord's current appetite for additional labor service or land concession. Weak negotiators get poor terms. The social consequences extend beyond the formal terms. So having been visible in that conversation, cap in hand, February, church steps, places him in a category the village will remember, not harshly. Everyone understands the pressures, but subtly, a slight recalibration in how he is addressed in certain contexts, a slight shifting of assumptions around his household stability, a slight elevation in the probability that future interactions involving resource or obligation will account for his diminished position. You watch from the edge of the churchyard and think about your own shelf. 3rd week of March, possibly 4th. Planting begins in the 3rd week. The worst cold of the winter arrives in the 3rd week of February. Not the longest cold snap. not the deepest snow. But 3 days of temperature, severe enough that the earthen floor stays cold all day regardless of the fire's strength, that the thatch roof develops ice formations along its underside where cold penetrates faster than body heat can counteract, that the drip in the northwestern corner freezes overnight and thaws in the day heat. The cycling expansion and contraction producing a larger gap that now admits not just moisture, but a thin stream of cold air you can feel when you stand in that corner. You sleep farther from that corner. The fire burns constantly for 3 days, no overnight banking. Maintained at the level above which the water barrel shows ice crystals. The practical minimum threshold you established in January. Above it, the family sleeps adequately. And below it, the cold penetrates blankets in ways that begin generating real physiological problems. The woodpile at the end of those 3 days is significantly reduced. You stand beside it in the afternoon of the 3rd day, in the pale, cold sunlight, and count with a deliberate precision you have been avoiding for weeks. 17 to 20 days of fuel at moderate consumption. Moderate consumption is last week's assumption. The past 3 days have not been moderate. The weather suggests the cold will ease, but not yet. 17 days, possibly less. The end of February is 11 days away. The beginning of reliable spring warmth that begins reducing dependence on hearth fire for basic interior survival, is 6 to 8 weeks away. There is a gap. It is not large. But it has moved from a number you managed in your head to a physical reality visible beside the south wall of the house. And the shift from mental calculation to visible stack changes the character of the problem. You work through the sequence in your head while your wife serves the evening meal. The stack. Then the secondary pieces in the shed. Broken handles, the worn fence post, the warped cartboard from autumn. Then the fence sections at the eastern boundary. Then back to the forest, which costs 2 days in a back that has not recovered. You go back inside. You eat your reduced portion. The fire is burning. Your neighbor from the western strip comes in the last week of February. He does not come with his cap in his hands. He has known you long enough that the performance of asking is not required. And he comes directly. His hay is running dangerously low. Not grain. His harvest ran heavier than yours, and his grain situation is better. His hay. He miscalculated ox feed requirements against the length of the cold period, and the 3-day cold snap consumed what remained of his buffer. He is asking to borrow. You have hay, not abundant hay. Your rick has been declining at the expected rate, but enough to provide what he needs without pushing yourself into the same crisis. The quantity is manageable from your stock. He offers terms himself, repayment after spring planting at a modest premium, plus 3 days of his son's labor during summer harvest. The offer is fair. Slightly better than fair, which tells you something. He wants this to land cleanly. He trusts you enough to be direct. He is not negotiating from collapse, but from a specific shortage. You agree. You provide the hay that afternoon. The transaction is small in material terms, but it matters structurally. It reaffirms a relationship of mutual support between the two households that has value beyond this exchange. It happens between equals rather than through the bailiff's desk. It costs you something you can afford rather than extracting something you cannot. Not every winter exchange operates this cleanly. Some of them happen at the Lord's granary, cap in hand, February afternoon. The exchanges that happen between neighbors directly, on terms both parties accept freely. Those preserve something beyond the material transaction. They preserve the sense that the system is shared rather than imposed. And this feeling matters more in February than in any other month. March arrives in stages. The cold does not break dramatically. It recedes. A degree here, a slightly longer afternoon there, the frost less complete each morning. But it does not leave. Receding cold still requires fire, still requires fuel, just at marginally lower intensity. The wood consumption drops fractionally. The pile, supplemented with the fence sections and the broken tool handles, extends itself by the arithmetic of marginally reduced daily consumption. The seed grain with the red cord is still on the shelf. The children are eating what is available. The youngest has developed a persistent cough you assess as ordinary winter cold, rather than the serious respiratory infection that took your wife's younger brother 2 winters ago. You watch carefully, eyes checking for the deeper lung sound. The cough stays in the throat. The oldest child is doing work that a 10-year-old should not need to sustain this long. He does not complain. He carries water, tends animals, manages fire additions during the midday hours when you're at the field boundary doing repair work, and he does these things with the quiet competence of a child who has been absorbing survival information his entire conscious life. He knows what the red cord means. He has never asked about it directly. He knows through watching, through the particular weight of adult silences, through understanding what is never touched and why. The grain reserve reaches its calculated end on the 18th of March. This is not an emergency. Planting begins on the 20th with the first soil preparation. Sam and the outdoor work of the agricultural cycle will begin producing the next season's food supply in a different sense. But between now and the first green growth, first leaves, first possibility of supplemental foraging in the woodland margins, there is a 4-week period of genuine scarcity. The salted meat barrels are down to their last pieces. The body must work at the precise moment in the agricultural calendar when it must work hardest. You calculated for this. Dried peas, preserved onions, a small reserve of oat flour held back specifically against this moment. The chickens beginning to produce eggs again with the slightly improved light. The possibility of early foraged greens, nettles, dandelion shoots, Sam the first growth in south-facing spots near the woodland edge, which provide both nutrition and the particular relief of fresh food after months of preserved and dried materials. You do not starve in March. You are hungry in March. The distinction is precise and real. The seed grain sack with the red cord is still full when you carry it from the shelf to the planting bag in the 3rd week of March. You untie the cord and weigh the sack in your hands. It is the right weight. It has been on the shelf since September, and it is still the right weight. Your wife is beside you when you untie it. She has been the guardian of the red cord as much as you have. Her discipline about the daily portion boundaries making it possible for the shelf's other reserves to last long enough that this sack could remain sealed. The arithmetic of survival in a medieval winter household is not individual. It is a collective management executed by 2 people in continuous coordination over months of pressure, operating on the same numbers, making the same invisible adjustments, holding the same lines. You fill the planting bag. You go to the field. The soil is cold and heavy, partially frozen in its lower depths, but the surface has thawed enough to work. You have used this field in every aspect of your life you can remember. You are working it at 6, trailing your father's plow. You are working it the autumn your mother died. You are working it the year the harvest was so good you paid off a debt that had been following the family since your grandfather's time. The field does not remember any of this. The field is earth and frost and the resistance of heavy clay in March. The first strips are open by early afternoon. Dark earth, turned, moisture visible in the broken surfaces. Birds follow the plow at a distance, picking through what the blade brings up. Behind you, in the house, the fire will burn tonight. The children will eat something from the remaining dried peas and the fresh eggs and the first nettles your wife found this morning in the south-facing bank beside the stream. It is not enough. It is almost enough, and almost enough in the medieval world is what survival looks like. The village that emerges from winter is not the same as the village that entered it. The old woman in the southern quarter did not survive. She died in the 3rd week of February. Her granddaughter was taken in by a neighboring family, and the circumstances were not dramatic. No crisis moment, no final visible deterioration. She simply reached the point where the combination of age, malnutrition, and respiratory illness accumulated past the capacity of her remaining systems to compensate, and she stopped. The man who borrowed from the bailiff will spend the next 2 years in heavier labor obligation than before. His easternmost strip has been effectively absorbed into the Lord's operational management under an arrangement that gives him continued access, under terms requiring annual payment that was not previously part of his obligation structure. He does not speak about this directly. No one asks directly. The village understands through observation. The household that consumed its seed grain in late January will plant with borrowed seed purchased at February prices, on set terms extending across the coming year and possibly the year following. The seed debt is a structural setback requiring multiple good harvests to exit. Your household is intact. The grain is planted. The oxen are functional. The children are alive. The middle child has fully recovered. The youngest's cough resolved in the second week of March with the return of outdoor air. Your back is improving with the return of labor that stretches rather than the static cold of indoor winter management. The shelf is nearly empty. It will fill again. The spring fields require full labor immediately. There is no recovery period. The agricultural calendar is continuous. Plowing, harrowing, planting, all of it within a window of weeks, determined by soil temperature and frost probability and the Lord's domain schedule, which has its own timetable that you are obligated to support with your own labor, in addition to working your own strips. The bailiff appears at the edge of the field on the second day of plowing, checking that labor obligations are being met. This is standard. The manor system's efficiency depends on direct observation of compliance, and the bailiff moves through the village fields at every critical moment. Plowing, planting, harvest, verifying that the labor services owed are being provided on schedule. You have met your obligations. The spring service will be met. The grain rent due at Michaelmas will be set aside from the harvest before any household consumption begins. The system continues. You continue within it. The field opens in long strips under the slow work of the oxen. Earth dark and cold, full of the vegetable smell of soil that has been frozen and thawed and is ready for seed. By evening, half the first strip is done. The oxen are intact, their condition held through the winter, and they pulled the plow through heavy March soil without failing. The fire is burning when you get inside. The pot is on. There are eggs in the pan. The shelf will begin refilling with the first wool sale in April and the first small grain purchase in late spring, and by October it will be back to the autumn measurement, and you will stand before it with the wooden measure in your hand and run the numbers again. The numbers will be different. The harvest will be different. The winter will be different. Longer or shorter, colder or milder, more or less wet. But the structure of the problem will be identical, and the margin between adequate and insufficient will be approximately the same because the margin is not set by the weather or the harvest alone. It is set by the structure itself. The Lord's rents are set by the structure. The labor obligations are set by the structure. The fuel rights, the milling access, the market prices, the loan terms, the seed costs, all of it set by a structure not designed around the survival comfort of smallholder peasant households and not adjusted to their convenience in difficult years. The structure adjusts the households to itself. The households that survive develop precision in management, discipline in consumption, flexibility in crisis, and enough accumulated knowledge to navigate the gap between the end of last year's food and the beginning of next year's harvest without crossing the lines that cannot be uncrossed. The seed grain with the red cord, the line between seed and food, the line between borrowing from your neighbor on equal terms and borrowing from the bailiff on his, the line between functional livestock entering spring and depleted livestock entering spring, the line between a household intact and a household diminished. Most households know where those lines are. Most households spend every winter navigating directly toward them, not by choice, but by the pressure of the system bearing down from above and the biology of cold and hunger bearing down from outside, the margin closing from both directions simultaneously. And the household somewhere in the narrowing middle, managing, calculating, consuming with restraint, working without rest, burning the correct wood in the correct sequence, keeping the red cord tied. Most households survive. Most winters. The question is not whether any individual winter will kill you. The question is whether the accumulated pressure of the winters you survive, the debt in the bad years, the livestock lost in the cold years, the seed grain consumed in the desperate years, the concessions made and obligations incurred, and strips of land that passed from one status to another through the quiet arithmetic of scarcity, will have changed the household's structural position so fundamentally by the time the next difficult winter arrives that survival on that occasion is no longer certain. This is how the medieval system kills. Not with dramatic storms, not with legendary cold, with arithmetic, with the patient accumulation of small deficits across multiple seasons, until a household that once stood with manageable margin stands at the edge looking at a shelf where the numbers no longer reach. The fire burns. The bread is thin. The wood pile beside the south wall is shorter than it should be. And winter, as it always has, continues.